Now we'll move to the third panel, which is entitled, I had it here. Well, it's exactly what XAI can bring to data protection. So now we'll have Helena Quinn talking. Let me quickly present her. She's a Principal Policy Advisor for AI and Data Science in the Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO, of the UK Data Protection Regulator. She has worked at the intersection of policy and AI in academia, industry, and the public sector for over 8 years. Most notably, Helena was a principal author of the ICO's guidance explaining decisions made with AI, and has produced a paper on the harms that algorithms can bring about for competition and consumers in her previous role as the UK Competition and Markets Authority, the CMA. She has also led work on the role algorithm audits can play in the regulation of AI through the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum, a consortium of UK regulators. Thank you for being here, Helena. The stage is yours.
Thanks, Vitor. So he mentioned that we've produced guidance on explaining decisions made by AI. So I'll tell you a little bit about how we got there, what the genesis was and what the impact of it's been. So back about 6 years ago in 2017, Dame Wendy Hall, who is a computer scientist in the UK, and Jérôme Pesanti, who is a French AI expert, published an independent report about growing the AI industry in the UK. They'd seen all these ethical principles that are being published by companies and third sector organizations, and they were sort of emphasizing things like transparency and accountability. They were also aware that the GDPR was about to come into force the next year, and they sort of emphasized that like Articles 12, 13, and 22 implied that there might be a requirement, a legal requirement to explain AI decisions in the law. So one of the key ways that they concluded that you would support uptake of AI in the UK would be by having the Data Protection Authority in the UK, so the ICO, work together with the Alan Turing Institute, which is the UK's National Centre for AI and Data Science, to make sort of a framework for explaining AI decisions. And that would really aim to sort of foster transparency and accountability and trust and help companies to use AI more effectively. The government thought that was important too. So in 2018, they officially asked the ICO and the Alan Turing Institute to work together to produce guidance based on the GDPR. So to get the most out of the guidance, we started the process by thinking, well, what is going to be the most effective way to explain decisions? What do the individuals who are affected by AI decisions, what do they need from an explanation? And it was also about promoting best practice in explanations, as well as fostering trust with people and helping people to trust AI decisions and not be too wary of them. So the first thing that we did was talk to the public. We worked with a couple of partners to run something called citizens juries. And that is where you get groups of individuals from lots of cross-sections of society to discuss and come to conclusions about a complex issue. And these people will be of different ages, different genders, different educational attainment, and ethnic sort of diversity as well. So we had 2 of those groups, and they heard from experts for about 5 days, and they discussed different scenarios of using AI in different contexts, like healthcare. So they looked at what kind of explanation you'd need if you wanted to diagnose a stroke, or in recruitment, where they looked at shortlisting job candidates for interviews, and then criminal justice, where they looked at selecting offenders for rehabilitation. So they were asked to consider the trade-off between accuracy and explainability that we've explored a bit today. So under that assumption that complex AI systems can be difficult to explain. So we wanted to conclude in which contexts an explanation is going to be really important and which context accuracy might be more important. And then we spoke to industry. So we held several roundtables with data scientists and researchers, chief data officers, senior executives, and we did talk to lawyers and consultants as well. So we also did in-depth interviews with some larger and smaller companies that offer technical tools for explaining AI. And from this engagement with the public and with industry, we found that the context, as we've heard now today a few times, is really important in terms of what people want from an explanation. So in criminal justice or recruitment, that was like explanation was more important than accuracy. But for healthcare, accuracy was more important. So people also thought that explanations of AI decisions should be similar to human explanations to build trust and make sure that explanations are understandable. We also found that the person an explanation should be provided for varied depending on that context. So in healthcare, it might be more important for the healthcare professional to understand the decision more than the patient. But you would need a hierarchy of detail to determine who needs to know what, and so you can provide things at different levels. So given those findings, we produced guidance, which ended up being a fairly mammoth document, but we broke it down into 3 parts targeted at different audiences. So the first part covered the basic components of explaining AI, which was aimed at data protection officers and compliance teams. The second part was about explaining AI in practice, and that's for technical teams to help them with the practical side of explaining decisions and providing those explanations to individuals of different types. The final part is about what explaining AI means for an organization. So it's about senior management understanding the documentation, the policies, the procedures that, and the roles of people in an organization that you need to put in place to make sure you're set up to provide a meaningful explanation. So we came up with ways that, well, things that we think constitute an explanation. There are 2 basic categories. The first one is process-based. That gives you information about the governance of your AI system and how you sort of explain the design and deployment. And then there's outcome-based explanations. And that's all about what happens in the case of a particular decision. So within those 2 categories, we also identified 6 main types of explanation. Fairly sensible things like rationale, what reasons led to a decision, how do you deliver that in an accessible and non-technical way? Then you've got responsibility, who's involved. So who's involved in the development, management, and implementation, and who do you contact for a human review? And data, what's been used in a particular decision and how? Fairness, so what have you done across the design and implementation of a system to make sure that the decisions it's supporting are generally unbiased and fair? And how an individual has been treated, have they been treated equitably? Then you've got safety and performance. So what have you done to maximize accuracy, reliability, security, and robustness of decisions and behaviors of the system? And then finally, we've got impact. So what have you done during the development and deployment to consider and monitor the impacts the system has, not just on the individual, but on wider society? So context is really important. There won't just be one way to explain decisions made with AI. So as with the healthcare example I gave, it could be the staff whose decisions are supported by the AI system and who need to relay that information meaningfully to a patient. It could be the people affected by the decision, particularly thinking about the needs of vulnerable groups or children. Or it could be auditors and external reviewers who are sort of in charge of monitoring and overseeing the production and deployment of the system. So we put this guidance out there into the world, and then in 2021, we did a feedback exercise to see how it had landed with organizations. So we got feedback from 56 companies, and overall, they thought it was useful and understandable. And particularly, they liked the legal framework that told them what they had to do. But they also liked the explanation types. So they all thought it was at least partly useful and feasible to implement. But there were some concerns. So some thought it was too long, which I can understand. Some also felt that the level of detail that we gave them was more suited to big companies that have the resources and actually build their systems in-house. So that's something that we'll need to think about. What we're doing now is we're thinking about explainabilities. We have, in the context of model inference attacks and security of data. So we've got a postdoctoral researcher working on thinking about how do you achieve explainable AI whilst ensuring privacy and security in your models. So that's something that may lead to guidance, and that's still a work in progress. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helena. It was very interesting. Now we'll move to the next speaker. He is Professor Gianclaudio Malgieri, an associate professor of law and technology at Leiden University, and the co-director of the Brussels Privacy Hub at the Vrije Universiteit Brussel. I'm sorry for pronouncing it this way, outrageous. He is also an associate editor of Computer Law and Security Review, and the founder of and coordinator of Vulnera, the International Observatory of Vulnerability and Data Protection, a topic of which he just published a book with Oxford University Press, which is called Vulnerability and Data Protection Law. He teaches and researches AI regulation and data protection, also at the intersection with other fields, including vulnerability studies, gender studies, and consumer protection. Gianclaudio, thank you very much for being with us. You can start whenever you want to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me and you can see my slides. So yeah, I'm very happy for virtually.
I'm sorry, Gianclaudio, we hear you a bit far. If you could speak louder or close the mic.
Yeah, I don't know. I am far at the moment. I am in Colorado for Privacy Law Scholarship Conference. I really wish I could be there with you, but you know, everything happens in these few weeks. So yeah, so I'm here on the other part of the Atlantic. So yeah, I'm very, as I was saying, very happy to be with you today, and with these great speakers. And actually, I'm very happy to follow Helena's presentation, because I was honored to be part of the research as an external researcher of the AI explainability and fairness research. So it's very interesting to see the impact. I didn't know the second part of the story, so the comments. What I will try to do very rapidly now, bridging between Helena and Sandra, is mentioning a bit this seduction of fixing AI, right? I think it's very much in line with what also the previous panel was mentioning. So the problem of incommunicability between different sectors, and also this seduction of fixing, right? I think this is one of the seduction of our century. We think we can fix everything. So we started trying to fix AI, then to fix explainable AI, because of course it was, you know, full of problems. I just interrogated ChatGPT, what is wrong with explainable AI? And the answer, my answer was in this shift, and the answer of ChatGPT is in the second one, and actually they overlap. So it says basically the complexity and the transparency fallacy, the trade-offs between performance and explainability, but also accuracy and understandability. Also, contextual dependency. This was a point that Zachary was mentioning, I think. And the problem is when we try to fix AI or fix explainable AI is that we again try to fix them by automation again. Of course, this seduction, I think, should be abandoned. Still, there are problems on the table. I think these questions were already mentioned in the previous presentation and in the previous panels. In particular, I think the last two questions, XAI for whom or XAI for what also. I will not address now in this few minutes XAI how, because we had wonderful discussion in the last at least 10 years about how to do explainable AI. I would like to focus on the issues and problems on the last three: XAI for what, XAI for whom, XAI when. The problems on the table, we tried with Frank Pasquale to highlight a bit these problems that are still on the table on an editorial 2 years ago on the New York Times. But just rapidly, I would like to mention the difference between explanation and justification, because as I think Zachary was saying before, we have a problem that we focused a lot on explainability. And explainability is mostly as also I don't remember the name, but there was another great presentation about explanations as a product and as a process, but basically showing why a decision B was taken. And so if A, then B. But the problem, and I think Sandra will also join this discussion, is not just explanation. We should look for justification. So we shouldn't just look at why, we should look at how the decision B is correct, is fair, is lawful, is accurate on the basis of some accepted principles. And this is easier for as a product and as a process, because it's not only about causes and purposes, but explaining why it's not unfair. It's easier to contest a decision if we have justification in place. And we overcome the trade-offs between comprehensibility and accuracy, because even a black box can be justified if we look at the impact of the black box. Of course, I'm not saying that they must be justified. I say that the justification process can apply also to deep learning. And I think what Helena was mentioning, the involvement of experts and representatives of vulnerable individuals, that is a part of justification process that is different from traditional explainable AI. We tried to shift this discussion between ex ante and between ex post explanation and ex ante justification in this paper. But focusing now XAI for whom? Yeah, as Vitor was saying, I focused quite a lot on vulnerability in the last 2 or 3 years, actually 4 or 5 years, and the problem of vulnerable data subjects is there. We started to look at vulnerability as a form of problem in understanding, and there was a great discussion on how to make explanations easier. But there is also other parts of the problem, vulnerability in decision making. So people that even though they can understand explanations in different contexts, they might suffer from power imbalance and they might not contest decisions. Or vulnerability to the effects. And this was quite underexplored. We have some fields where automated decision making is producing incredible adverse effects. Just let's think at migration and border control, for example, or financial vulnerabilities, people that can be manipulated, etc. And all discussion of explainable AI was mostly based on giving more transparency and fixing the problem of AI just with more transparency. But we need more fairness, we need power imbalance, we need involvement of individuals. Also because if we think that explanation and transparency are the solution to many problems, well, the CNIL released last year a study saying that, I mean, if you cannot read English, I can very rapidly translate. The average person who lodges a complaint against data processing related activities is a male, is middle-aged, very well educated, and privileged, right? So this is a problem also, explanation for whom and the contestability for whom. We should maybe turn the discussion upside down. And a component in this is when we should have this explanation, because we should probably change, we should probably shift from an ex post justification, ex post explanation, the explain, consent, contrast model that we saw. It's quite fallacious for many reasons that I think were evident in the previous slides, to involving in the design and connecting the accountability design, accountability measures, risk assessment, impact assessment to the explainable AI discussion, and towards also an ex-ante justification. So we have the difference between ex-post model and ex-ante model in general, looking at AI governance, is that in ex-ante models, high risks are prohibited by default, and AI producers must prove through explanation and justification that their system are not discriminatory, are not unfair, are not inaccurate. And then there might be supervisory authorities to check this justification explanation. The GDPR already maybe, and this is something a bit brave, I know, but already gives some indications about ex-ante explanation, ex-ante involvement in the decision making. We discussed a lot about in the past about DPIA, or also right not to be subject to automated decision. One safeguard is to express one's point of view, and it is mentioned separately as a separate principle, as a separate right, and not included in right to contest. So clearly right to contest is ex post. Why not right to express one point of view? Why can't we see right to express one point of view as an ex ante right? Of course, I am stretching a lot and I'm giving provocations here, but I think we are closing today, so it's time for provocations, because we already had wonderful explanations and descriptions so far. So just to conclude, I know I have like 1 minute, I guess. Just to conclude, possible ways ahead. I think it's important that we move from explanation to justification, from ex post to ex ante, but also from iterative and circular process where, and this was reflected very well in the ICO work and in Helena's presentation, including impacting individuals within and before the decision is taken, participative design with representatives and experts of vulnerabilities, and making risk assessment, explainability, and justification as part of an iterative process that is necessary. And so, yeah, just to give you like final shots, I think the direction might be design and co-participative design. There is this wonderful open access book, Design Justice, that I suggest you, and the AI Act is maybe going in that direction with some conformity assessment, fundamental right impact assessment, which is also a form of justification. Thank you very much. And again, we are doing this work with Vulnera, this platform, but I'm very curious to hear if there are any questions, and the rest of the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gianclaudio. We'll now move to our last but definitely not least speaker. That's Professor Sandra Wachter. This is a new issue. Professor Wachter is a professor of technology and regulation at the Oxford Internet Institute at the University of Oxford, where she researches the legal and ethical implications of AI, big data, and robotics, as well as internet and platform regulation. Her current research focuses on profiling, inferential analytics, explainable AI, algorithmic bias, diversity, and fairness, as well as governmental surveillance, predictive policing, human rights online, and health tech and medical law. Professor Wachter, I can see you've already joined us, so it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. Just wanted to check if you can hear and see me okay. Yes, fantastic. Okay, then I will try to share my slides now with you. Just a second.
So it should be at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, I'm in there. I'm just not quite sure how I can share my window with you, like my screen. Or does it need to be the presentation in itself? Sorry.
You have to open the presentation first, yes.
Okay. See if that has worked. So quick. Do you see the pretty version now, or do you see the presenter
It
view?
looks pretty, yes. So please go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Fantastic. So yes, thank you so much for the invitation. And briefly want to just talk about some of my research that I've been doing in this area, and therefore the title of the presentation today, which is Accountable AI in Europe. And so yes, I don't think I have to talk about why we care about or should care about black boxes. Because we've listened to many fantastic presentations on that issue throughout the whole day. But basically what it is about is that if an algorithm makes an important decision about you, a loan decision, an employment decision, and whether you have to go to prison, you want to understand why this has happened to you. And the thing you don't want to have is just getting a rejection stamp without any understanding of how this has happened. This is a topic that has been with me for quite some time. And I published a paper a couple of years ago in 2016 or 17, where I deep dived into the data protection regulation, the GDPR, because I had big hopes that some sort of exposed explainability tool or right would actually be enshrined there. I'm not going to go into the details of that. Brent Middlestead, my co-author, has already talked about this. I'm only mentioning this because this for me was the starting point to really think about this topic in more depth. And so even though we came to the conclusion that there is no legally protected right to get an explanation if a decision is made by an algorithm about you, it started my search for a right to explanation, on my advocacy. And I personally thought that this will be an endeavor that will be embraced by everybody who wouldn't want to have more transparency and accountability when it comes to AI systems. But let me tell you, it was not a battle that was blessed with tailwinds, if you say. There were a lot of people that actually had problems with too much transparency. And so some of the reasons that people were having problems with explanations or transparency in general were many reasons, some of which I've listed here. Those are the 4 major issues that people always started throwing in my face when I was advocating for more transparency and explainability. The first was, well, too much transparency will infringe on trade secrets, intellectual property rights. We can't have that. Then there is the camp that says, oh, this is technically unfeasible. We cannot actually explain any of those decisions. Then there is a more generous camp that says, oh, we can explain some things, but surely it's not going to be very meaningful for individuals. So explanation should be not used in those systems. And the third ones that said, well, too much transparency or explainability could allow people to manipulate and game the system. And I'm okay with all of those reasons. None of those are technically wrong. I just don't think that they're the end of the discussion. They're the beginning of the discussion. They're just not good enough to justify opacity. And so I got interested in the question, and Helena already talked about this in detail, explainability for whom and who should be the recipient of that. We personally were super interested in what kind of explanation is useful for the person that is at the receiving end. So a person that doesn't get the loan, that doesn't get the job, that has to go to prison. And so we came up with 3 reasons or goals for explanations in that sentence, why people want to have an explanation. Well, they might want to just understand the decision-making decision. They want to understand why they didn't get the job. They might want to challenge why they didn't get the job, or they want to have some guidance on how to change their behavior or their situation in order to be successful in the future. And based on that, we wrote a paper which is called Counterfactual Explanations Without Opening the Black Box. Again, public available if you wanted to have a look. And here we combined law, ethics, and computer science and came up with a computational method that lets you explain and pursue all the goals that I have just mentioned. So we developed a method that can easily be computed that tells you why and how a decision has been made. So if you compute a counterfactual and decision-making process, what happens is that it will spit out something like, you have been denied a loan because your income was £40,000. If it had been £45,000, we would have offered you the loan, right? That is a very easily understandable explanation. It helps you understand why you didn't get the loan. If there is something wrong with the decision-making process, it might also allow you to challenge that decision. And it also gives you an indication of what needs to change for you to get the loan in the future. And so a very easy way to understand this is that if you have an algorithmic system, you have input and you have output. This is the data you put in, and this is the decision that the thing makes, right? And so rather than explaining the blue line, which is the logic of the algorithm, what you do is you focus on the output side, and you know the output is you didn't get the loan. And you change the output to you would have gotten the loan, and you see how the input is changing. So you're trying to figure out and tinker around until you find out what needs to be different on the input side for you to actually get the loan. So that means how can you move from 0 where you currently are to the point of 2 where you actually would get the loan or the job or whatever it might be. And those counterfactual explanations can be computed in multiple ways. So it's not just about one counterfactual that can be given to you. We can give you multiple ones. So it could be, the savings that you have had an impact on it, or it might be the salary, right? And that's really important because it's not, the circumstances of a person are not the same for everybody. So giving people multiple counterfactuals to work on is going to be really, really helpful here. And so again, those are very good advantages in my opinion, because it tells you the smallest possible changes that need to happen for you to get the loan or the job. It doesn't tell you everything about the algorithmic system, and we already heard that's not what people really want. It tells you about the most important decision criteria that actually had an impact on the decision and how those decision criteria need to be different for you to be successful. And then again, this addresses all the things that people have had problems with in the past, which is, you don't need to understand the logic if you wanted to do that. They can be generated in very complex system, even neural nets with very low computing power. They're super easy to understand. You only give out minimal information, so it's not going to infringe property rights of other people, intellectual property rights of other people, and you're less likely to be able to manipulate the system. So we try to keep those concerns in mind when developing that method. So all open access, all open data, everybody can use it, everybody can use it for free. But I just want to mention that industry has picked up on those counterfactuals in the past. So in 2018, Google implemented counterfactuals in their own products. They are using it now in TensorFlow and in Google Cloud. IBM has also implemented it. Flock, which is an insurance company, is using counterfactuals now in their products. The same comes true for Accenture and Vodafone. So you can see that industry has picked up on that, and they're quite happily using it. But again, everybody can use it if they wanted to. Policymakers on the same side, the Working Party has issued guidance recommending the methods here. The same has happened in Germany with Data Ethics Commission, and the European Commission has also issued guidance citing our work. And here at home, the Standards Committee has done the same. So it's really, really exciting to see that the academic research that we have done also, was interesting for policymakers and industry alike. But this is not the end of the story, right? XAI is really, really important. I have always been advocating for that, but I have also always said it is just one side of the coin, of the accountability coin, if you will, right? I can give you a very transparent and easily understandable explanation, as in, I didn't give you the loan because you have black shoes. That's really easy to understand, but it's not necessarily justified, right? And so XAI and justification always have to be fought together. Like the thinking of what are the criteria that you're using to make decisions is actually essential to that. And so following up on the work on explainability, in 2018, I wrote a paper which is called The Right to Reasonable Inferences, Rethinking Data Protection Rights in the Age of Big Data and AI, where I exactly focused on that and said, well, you know, I can explain that I use black shoes to make loan decisions, but what is the justification for that, right? Because in reality, what you're doing is you're inferring something about black shoes. You think that black shoes are a good metric to measure whether somebody will repay a loan or will be a good worker or whether they will reoffend, right? It's about data in a way. You're making inferences about people, and therefore it is a privacy problem. And so again, because that's also the title of our panel here, you can see how XAI and privacy really are working together. Again, I don't have much time to talk about the paper from 2018, but if you're interested, it's important because, in my opinion, data protection law doesn't actually protect inferences enough in the way that it should currently. So the part of like justifying why you're using certain data to make decisions is not something that is really covered by data protection law. One of the reasons is that it's not quite clear what the legal status of inferences are, if they're actually protected under the law. Even if they are personal data, it's not quite clear if you are allowed to have access to it, or if you can even rectify it if you don't like the inferences that are being drawn about you, whether you're creditworthy or whether you're a good worker or whether you should be promoted and things like that. And the ECJ has unfortunately said that data protection law is not really here to regulate how we make decisions or the content of decision making. It's much more about procedure, privacy, and no recourse mechanisms are offered for assessments that are being made about people. If you wanted to have recourse, you need a sectorial law to do so, right? And that is, in fact, one of the biggest problems, because very often we leave it to the private autonomy of decision makers, how they give out insurance and how they give out loans. And that's really important because recourse really only works if you have some sort of standards that you have to follow, because if there aren't any standards, then no rules are ever going to be broken and you cannot actually contest what's being done to you. And so the research project that started in 2017 that I'm still working on is this new right that I'm advocating for, a right to reasonable inferences, which means that you should have a right on the ex ante side, on a sectorial basis, that there are standards that need to be followed when very important decisions are being made about you, where we have more discussion and rules about the data sources that we're using to make those decisions, that we know more about where the inferences are coming from, whether those methods are actually tested at all. And that is then coupled with an ex post right to contestation, because you really need to have that discussion on whether ex ante there is a justification for using that, and then have a method for explaining how we came to that decision and giving people the ability to contest that. So again, that's my theory or my project where I advocate for this new right. And again, I'm very happy that I was quite successful with that in terms of like policy making an impact, because the World Economic Forum published a report in 2019 and 2020 where they cited some of the work. I know that the European Parliament has done this in at least 2 or 3 different reports where they picked up that type of thinking and that type of governance. And here at home in the UK, the new data protection regulations that are going to come into force have been flavored by this right to reasonable inferences and by inferences protection, and this dichotomy between explainability and justification. So I think if we have that, I think the best way to think about accountability in a way. And so, yeah, I'm going to stop here. I'm very happy to take any questions about it. I hope this is interesting for people that want to figure out how we can have a holistic way of governing AI in the current situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for the wonderful and very clear presentation. We'll now open for Q&A. I would like to start the segment with a question from my own about the ethical or legal implications. So, are there or could be ethical implications or considerations we should have associated with explainable AI? And I would like to link with the experience that Helena shared with us on the need to balance the transparency with the protection of intellectual property. I would like to know more about what was the reaction of the stakeholders on that, if she could share any on that, please. Thank you.
So I think we can all agree from today that it's not just about transparency for transparency's sake. You know, people do have a right to protect the intellectual property of their products and services, but you do need to balance that with the rights of individuals. And the point of explainability is to provide something meaningful to them. We didn't get granular feedback on the trade-off for businesses between transparency and explainability, but from the citizen juries, it was very clear that you did need to have enough transparency to make something meaningful. You might need to have someone who is translating between the technical side and the data subject side, but as long as sort of trade secrets or intellectual property are not being used as an excuse to obfuscate and to sort of protect something that actually is in the data subject or the public's interest to know about the decision-making process, then you would prioritize a bit more transparency. And if there is some sort of, I've personally heard concerns from businesses about the reputational risks of being more transparent with citizens, data subjects, and you know, if they're really concerned about the reputational ramifications, if their system's not explainable enough, or they're concerned about what it might do, then I would suggest that they might want to think about actually, you might not want to do that. So I think that you need to find that balance about what's reasonable.
Thank you. I'm not sure if Sandra or Gianclaudio want to react to that question, especially on the ethical and legal possible implications of explainable AI.
Yeah, I mean, can only agree with that. I think that explainability is one piece of the puzzle in terms of accountability, but it's an essential one. It's not the only one, but it is definitely a hallmark of good governance. And other things have to do with privacy protection. Other things have to do with bias detection and mitigation, and other things. Even before that, we have to ask ourselves the question whether we want those systems to begin with, which again comes back to the justification system, because I might have a system that's perfectly explainable. It might even be privacy protecting, but it is maybe problematic for other reasons because it infringes on human dignity. It's automating things it shouldn't be automated, or it has other properties that are problematic. So just because the tech works doesn't necessarily mean we have to use it. But if we go down the path of wanting to use it, then explainability, privacy protection, and bias mitigation are the things that we always have to keep in mind.
Yeah, just building on that, I just back what Sandra and Helena said, and I think the key point is on how we locate, how we put explainable AI in the bigger picture. I think this is the fil rouge of today's interventions. And in the big picture is to look, as Sandra was saying, at dignity, and in particular dignity of people that are in situations of a big power imbalance, and we saw that more information is not the solution. More information is a form of empowerment connected to many other things, including rethinking design, rethinking justification, and having clear in mind what are the principles for that we want to, that these AI systems are applied for. The AI Act now has an additional small introduction on principles. I'm happy that there is. I'm a bit skeptical because fairness is mentioned just in relation to biases, but not in relation to other form of power imbalances. This is another discussion, I know, but very well connected, right? So it's not just bias or unbiased. The computer scientists tried to work on that a lot on this link, but I think there's much more that emerged, right? And so it's also manipulation, it's also exploitation of other forms of vulnerability. So all these things should be related, I guess. So yeah, just that.
The audience, and I'll now proceed to lead the mic to the question.
It's a bit of a half provocation, maybe. It's a bit horizontal question, more or less for all the speakers. One of the points that came out today or across was that, okay, we want to have explainability, but also the expectation, which at some point were even explicitated, about you give more data. That's typical of machine learning. The people go, give me more data and I will solve all the problems, but also to get the context. If you give me more data, I will be able to get a context. Now, that is because we assume implicitly all the models we are building are meant to reproduce the way we work in our brain, the way we learn, the way we think. But there is one example which shows that that's still very wrong, which is exactly about the context. Our brain is literally built, was found a couple of years ago, a structure in our brain which is really meant to use different ways to analyze information based on the fact of using context or not to recover the essential information and manipulate it. The models that we built, even if it started from the old model of the neuron and then created neural networks, we went for the deep learning, the layers, et cetera, do not have that kind of info. They are not built in that way because, of course, the knowledge has been accumulated in we really work on our brain over time. And there is a separation between the computer sciences and neurobiology, which ended up not often communicating. That also means, on the other hand, that maybe one aspect that should also be considered and implemented is moderating the expectation of people that they will get an explanation which the same kind of explanation or behavior they will expect from a human being, because they will not get it, most probably. Unless the models themselves, the way we build the models, the computer models they use for decision, is changes to incorporate something more similar, assuming that it's possible, that's a different matter, but assuming is, maybe that's something also to remember, also in the explainability, in trying to do the explainability, the fact that it might be needed to simply make people accept, okay, we can tell you that's how we got it, that's how you can get the information, or whether you should contest it, but be aware, do not be surprised that it's not the way a human will do it, because that's the way it is.
Thank you. Does any of the panelists want to react to this comment?
Yeah, I would just say that in general, I think I would try to refrain from trying to compare how humans explain and algorithms are explainable, in the sense that, you know, measuring an algorithm and saying the algorithm isn't as good as humans, or like humans are also black boxes and therefore, you know, why should the levels of transparency be similar? That's, to me, is sad, because, like, is that the only reason why we use technology, is just to automate what we already have, or do we want to use technology to make better and more transparent decisions, right? And so I think, you know, using that system to do the thing that humans cannot do, because who knows what's going on in my black box. With algorithms, we can at least attempt to do so, even if that's not something that can be done on a human basis. But in addition to that, I would just caution that just because something is explainable doesn't make it a better decision maker. And there's a lot of like hype around that AI can be used for all types of decisions, but like AI is not, an oracle, and it's not filled with wisdom, and it's not going to challenge our assumptions. It's built on our assumptions. That's the only thing it knows. So it will just, transport whatever we have into the future. And there are certain areas where, regardless of how much explainability is built into it or how much data you have, there are certain things you can't predict because they are inherently unpredictable. And that's things like when people will reoffend or other high-risk areas, when people will, whether people will be a good worker, whether people will do good at law school. This depends on so many factors that are inherently unpredictable on an individual level. And so we just have to be careful that there are just certain things where AI can't really help us because it's not something that is predictable. And so that's a discussion to be had, is like, what can AI do and what can it not do, and not necessarily compare it to the human benchmark, because we are not the best decision makers either.